Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Premier said that she has called on the federal government to withhold funding from BC for the Pan-Canadian Climate Framework. That's a whopping $30 million. But a week ago, Justin Trudeau's Alberta Minister Sohi signed a $4.1 billion check for the Horgan New Democrats for infrastructure. Will this government agree with me that that money should be withheld from the BC government until the pipeline is built?
Deputy Premier.
We will defend Alberta and the working people of Western Canada, Mr. Speaker. Now that the energy industry needs Ottawa to step up, we call on them to act. Of course, members opposite know a lot about Ottawa ragging the puck. Their leader sat in the House of Commons for about 2 decades and barely even mentioned the pipeline, Mr. Speaker. But the Harper government never came close to building a pipeline to Tidewater. We are closer than we have ever been, and we will not relent. We will move forward on those 3 fronts and call on the federal government to join us.
Now, Mr. Speaker, again I ask, will the government call on Prime Minister Trudeau to withhold the $4.1 billion in infrastructure payments to BC unless the $7 billion of private infrastructure funding is allowed to complete the Kinder Morgan pipeline? Will they join with me in calling on the federal government to do that?
Thank you. The Deputy Premier.
I know the member opposite wants to spend his time in Ottawa, or so it appears, because all of his actions here are called on Ottawa. Mr. Speaker, we have 3 tools in Alberta's toolbox, and we are using them. First, we have the ability to bring on some economic consequences to the people of British Columbia, because they've done exactly that to the people of Alberta. Second, we are fighting in court, and at every time we've gone to court, we have won on behalf of Albertans. And third, we will invest in the project if that's what it comes to. We call on the federal government to use those same tools. They have them. They have a lot of tools in their toolbox. You had them when you were in Ottawa. I wish you would have used them then.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, just a week ago, the Trudeau government signed an agreement to transfer $4.1 billion, discretionary dollars, to BC's Horgan government for infrastructure. Does the Deputy Premier think that that reflects seriousness on the part of the Trudeau government to get Kinder Morgan built, or does she believe the federal government should have made construction of the pipeline a condition of that infrastructure agreement with the Horgan government?
Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of what we're doing to move forward in getting this pipeline, because that needs to be our #1 call, is making sure that we're acting on these 3 fronts. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we have introduced, or will be later introducing, legislation that will enable us to increase the price of the pump if that's what it comes to. This is a natural consequence of impacting jobs in Alberta, hurting Alberta families. Mr. Speaker, I don't think if I lived in British Columbia and knew that that was coming down the road, I'd be very happy with my government for putting Alberta in a position where they had to do that. Of course, there are other financial measures that the federal government could take, and we call on them to consider doing that. We think it's important that the national interests move forward and that they be held to account.
Second supplemental.
Turning off the taps, Mr. Speaker. That's a great idea. I wonder where they came up with that one. Mr. Speaker, let me ask once again, the federal government just signed an agreement a few days ago to transfer $4 billion tax dollars to BC for infrastructure. This is not actually a difficult question. The government here says they'll do anything to fight for this pipeline. Here's something. How about calling on the federal government to pull that money back until the pipeline is completed?